Hello, everyone. Welcome to a special edition of Library Love Fest on Facebook Live. I'm Virginia Stanley, Director of Library Marketing at HarperCollins, and I'm joined here with my colleagues.
Good afternoon. I'm Lainey Mays. I'm Library Marketing Associate and happy to be here.
Hi, I'm Grace Catanolo, Library Marketing Assistant. Excited to be here.
And we are thrilled for today's special episode. We have a special guest on our show, Ari Melber, award-winning journalist, writer, and attorney, and host of The Beat with Ari Melber, which airs nightly at 6 p.m. on MSNBC. Ari, are you there? Hello.
Hi, everyone.
Hi. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Great to be here.
So we are talking about our HarperCollins publication, but a little bit more about Ari first. You served as MSNBC's Chief Legal Correspondent and an NBC News legal analyst, reporting on law and justice stories across all NBC platforms. And in 2016, you received an Emmy Award for your reporting on the Supreme Court. And now you have written a foreword, a brilliant foreword, to the HarperCollins publication of the recently released January 6th report, which went on sale on December 29th. And while the January 6th report has been made available by several publishers, many of you may not be aware that the HarperCollins edition with this brilliant foreword by Ari Melber debuted at #1 on the New York Times list and #2 on the Publishers Weekly list. It was also #1 on Amazon. So we can't wait to get into this discussion with you. And joining in the conversation today is librarian Barbara Genco. Hi, Barbara.
Hi.
Barbara, you are our librarian, our friend, and our go-to person. After many years as the Director of Collection Development at the Brooklyn Public Library, you currently work as a library consultant for Martin Gomez and Associates. Barbara was an elected member of the ALA Council and served as the president of the Association for Library Services for Children. She was an honorary delegate to the Second White House Conference on Libraries and was appointed by Congressman Major Owens. She did years of advocacy with elected officials in support of library funding in Washington, D.C., Albany, and New York. And she is the perfect person to interview Ari Melber. Barbara, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today.
Ari, you are my favorite MSNBC commentator. And I listen to you either in person or afterwards. And I would encourage everybody who's curious about the legal implications of what's been happening in the last few years and what's happening today to listen to you, because you are my go-to guy. On January 6th, as I was watching it, I said to myself, I have to do this now, Ari. Watching it all unfold on TV, I said, maybe Gil Scott-Heron was wrong. Maybe the revolution is being televised. And to me, watching it was one of the worst experiences of my life. And you, in your introduction, I think were among one of the first people to tell it like it is, as my R&B love, Aaron Neville says. You told it like it is, and you said it is a coup. Do you want to tell us more about that?
Yeah, thank you all for the kind introduction. Shout out to our librarians around the nation and the world. We need books, we need facts, however you read them. I know some people get it on the Kindle. You guys showed the cover. The width is also worth seeing because it's the full report, and we'll talk about what I emphasize in the cover, and the reason why I was thrilled to partner with HarperCollins and do this as a book that people can read today or next week or next year or maybe in 10 years as we make sense of this, is that this is something that requires that level of depth. We all know that people are busy, and even people who follow the news aren't necessarily going to take this all down in one sitting this week. It's a longer term process. Going to as you say, the #1 New York Times bestseller is a great honor for HarperCollins and myself and the Beat and the team who works on this. But to me, that's about, I mean, my intro is here, and then you have the rest of the facts, and those facts, as we saw in the hearings, can really matter. So that's top line. To your question, and shout out to Gil Scott-Heron and the wisdom of some of these poems and lyrics that still apply. Yeah, it was all televised and it was worse than it looked that day. The reason why I write that it was a coup is that the evidence that's emerged over time shows it was not something less than a coup. For example, a riot, which is a criminal act, but one of a generally spontaneous nature. Or it was not merely elector and voter fraud, which comes from the bottom up, but doesn't necessarily involve the sitting government. The reason why I open the introduction by saying they attempted a coup, that's the most important fact to understand, is that we have to be led by the evidence, not your other potential opinions of Donald Trump or criticisms of his policy, his leadership, or his failures. Those are all in the bounds of his work as a politician. We are talking about the criminal exposure of the evidence that shows he and others in and out of government proactively planned a multi-month criminal conspiracy to overthrow the government. And if somebody listening or reading says, oh, well, okay, yeah, I mean, that's sort of, we know that, right? I hear that a lot sometimes among the cognoscenti. Well, we knew that, right? Nobody knew that when they woke up on January 6th. Nobody knew that, really, to be honest, on January 7th. And I also write in the foreword that if you look back at the insurrection impeachment trial, which wasn't that long ago, 2 years ago, led by Trump, some of his most ardent critics and Democrats in Congress, that trial did not treat this as a multi-month coup. It largely prosecuted that case with what they knew at the time, it was very fast, as whether the speech incited violence. And then you had these legalistic debates about whether it met the standards for legal incitement and whether you could try him in the Senate or in court for that speech. And people may not like hearing this, but I'd be the first to tell you, under the law, you can say a lot in a speech that is not a crime, and that's not certainly an indictable coup. This goes so far beyond that speech, it almost seems quaint to focus too much on what he said on the 6th. And I'll say it another way, if you want to be as fair as possible to the former president, if hypothetically he gave that same speech, but didn't take these other acts, and other people didn't take these acts, there might not have been a crime that day based on the speech, even though it was, by any standard of democracy, a totally absurd and horrific set of demands and claims to make while Congress was about to effectuate part of the peaceful transfer of power. The reason that it looks like a criminal conspiracy is because of the lengths he went through. I count 8 plots, 6 of which were illegal at a minimum, to overthrow the government. That would be, if we were making an opening statement, Barbara, that would be the opening statement in brief.
Right, and I love that little chart that you have where you put all 8 strands and lead it to that event. And to me, that was a very valuable way to present the content. And truly, Ari, why do you think, I mean, I think you make a very compelling case in this introduction for the importance of reading as much as possible about this event. But why do you think every public library in America needs to have a copy of this report?
Yeah, I think every library needs this report along with other independent accounts of the insurrection to understand historically what happened, how in a modern world where we imagine ourselves civilized and we think we exist largely under the rule of law, and maybe unjustly prosecuted at times, but we think we live in that type of society, how this got to that point, and that you could have open criminal attack on the seat of government, the Congress, that it could go on that long, that a sitting president could allow it and encourage it to go on. And then now, 2 years in, and this is the open part of history we're still writing, so many of the people who plotted and planned it have not been indicted, let alone convicted, while the muscle, the pawns, the physical attackers have been indicted, many of them convicted, some for sedition. That gap is all part of the living history that I think we need in our libraries. And I've said this on air, I'll say it here. That can include the government edition of the report, which is totally free to everyone. If you're watching this online and you want to go get it, you can download that from the January 6th committee. If you want our version, right, I've got my extra introduction. You have to come here for that. And there are other versions by other independent outlets, the Times and the New Yorker, all the versions, all the reporting and the evidence should be out. And if there are fact-based counter arguments, for example, I think libraries may ultimately be including books about these historic sedition trials, and they'll include some of the defense arguments. Now, in many of those trials, the defense lost before a jury of peers, but we need to understand when some of the defense, for example, says they went there because they thought this would be okay or even lawful because the sitting president told them to do it. That's their defense. Okay, let's get into that as a nation so people understand, A, that's not true. We don't live in a society where any politician, even the president, can make law with their words. The president can't say, well, today it's okay to kill certain people and everyone can go do that. And if those people, through hate, lack of education or otherwise, didn't know that, they're paying for it now. Donald Trump isn't paying for it yet, they're paying for it. And so, you know, all of that, to your question, needs to be part of our living history. We all know the maxim, if you don't know your history, you run a higher risk of repeating it or something to that effect. That's exactly where I think we are now.
No, Ari, one of the things you did point out in your recent conversations on the show is that Donald Trump organized his relationships with others in the same method, using the same methodology as a mob boss. And do you think that led to the fact that he distributed the culpability downward, which makes it harder for the actual responsibility for this coup to attach itself to him?
Yes. Why are we talking about so many lawyers? Why are we talking about so many intermediaries? He has been at this game in business and politics for a long time. And he is very proactive, precise, and even shrewd about pushing everything through other people. Then saying, oh, well, that's the lawyer. How could the lawyer break the law? Or that's privilege because I talked to the lawyer about it. Or if the lawyers did it, I was relying on them. That's his whole MO. And that's why, you know, some of the, if by gangster or thug, we mean people who abuse power and skirt or break the law to get that which they might otherwise not be able to get if they played by the rules, then yeah, you got thugs in business. You got thugs who use and misuse lawyers that way. And you may have a gangster or thuggish mentality at the top. So I think that's all deliberate. And this also speaks to something about the facts. People who really dislike someone, even for good reason, can become blinded by that dislike. And in relationships or life or politics, hey, you can think what you want. That's fine. But if you endeavor to find the truth, you can't be blinded by certain emotions. And I have noticed that Donald Trump has played on people underestimating him or thinking he's stupid and sloppy to then use that for his ends in the war of public perception as well as the legal aspect. And they are linked. Everyone I think understands there's a linkage between what at the end of the day you have to present to a jury, right? And so even as I said, when we woke up on the 7th, many people didn't fully appreciate how much he had been directly planning multiple plots to try to overthrow the election, always carefully using the intermediaries you mentioned.
You know, Ari, early on in this conversation about the coup, you said two words that struck me because it brought me back to my high school political science class. Cui bono, who benefits? And I said, maybe I did learn something in college, but maybe you could talk a little bit about who was the ultimate beneficiary and how he shed that culpability to others. And ultimately, will there ever be any opportunity to indict him or bring him to justice for this incitement to coup?
Well, on the question of indictment, the open probes that exist are the special counsel probe into this and the document issue for Mar-a-Lago, and the Georgia case where just this week the grand jury has finished its work. And so it's going to be put up or shut up time in both cases. I think in the next months, not 9 or 6, but really the next couple months, it's not an exact timeline. In both those cases is the window, and they're either going to act to indict people involved in what I call the planning or not. And those could be people around Donald Trump and or not, including him. So we'll find out. And I think that at the DOJ, as I write in the foreword, they've taken a 2-tiered approach, and they've been very aggressive in getting the people who stormed the Capitol. And sedition is a serious charge that isn't the automatic first thing you go to. I mean, prosecutors like to win. They start with the most common charges that they think they can win. Sedition is not one for many reasons. So they've been very assertive there. But then on the planners, they haven't done anything. And so if it's a co-conspirator, right, it's a sign. I can't tell you what's going to happen in the future. But if it's a conspiracy with multiple people, and I explain that in the foreword what that means, and you need co-conspirators to prove it, and they haven't indicted any of the co-conspirators, well, they don't look very close to going after Donald Trump. That's a clue. Now, I could say that to you today, and tomorrow you could find out they do indict 3 co-conspirators, and then a month later they indict him. So anything can change. But that's how I measure that out. In Georgia, that's specific to those state laws, and it's a little more local. But they've sent target letters to Giuliani and other people who did the elector fraud, which is one of those plots. So again, if they indict some of those people, that's all for the benefit, as you said, of Trump. And then you say, okay, was he in on that? I mean, I interviewed Rusty Bowers last week, and we talked about something that he testified to in the hearings, which was that the way they connected with John Eastman, right, was that Trump was pushing him out there. So John Eastman is the coup lawyer. It's not that he popped up and made a lot of calls and it just was a mess. It was at the behest of Donald Trump at a high level. And there are others in Congress who said the same thing. So Eastman is Trump's lawyer. He's not acting rogue, right? If someone comes up and says, oh, I did this for Barbara, ultimately it was for her, that's not good enough in court. If there's no linkage, they just said words, but you don't have a relationship, you don't have emails, you didn't retain them as your representative or lawyer, right? This is the opposite. He is the lawyer. He speaks at the January 6th rally where he's in good stead with the president. He's being introduced by the president at the time, and he's effectuating what Georgia is investigating as a crime. So those are the questions of, yes, not only does he benefit, he's in on it. And again, I want to say, those are the reasons why you have a case. If he was indicted, he'd still, Trump or any of the other plotters, they would be legally presumed innocent. We would hear their side. They might ultimately be vindicated. And if they are, we would cover that. It's not my job to, quote unquote, try the case. But I can tell you factually whether it's a weak case or a strong one. Currently, several of those plots are a strong case.
One thing that I thought about as I continued to read and reread, I actually reread it, the report, your parts of the introduction, was the clear line, the through point of the rising authoritarianism in our country. And 2 events in my past that, my knowledge of history made me think of the March on Rome in 1922, which led to the rise of fascism in Italy. And of course, the Reichstag fire. And of course, we can point to this and say, oh yeah, well, that was then, those nuts, they were all being used. But you know what? We just had our own. Holy cow. And he absolutely expected to be raised to their shoulders of the crowd and being carried through the streets. And I'm worried now that they're based on, even though the hearings were brilliant, and I can't imagine them being organized better, and the ability to have this report, are we going to start experiencing fatigue? Are we going to be tired of the insurrection fatigue? What's going to happen now? Is DOJ going to fail us?
All good questions. Look, I don't know what DOJ is going to do. I gave you my sort of guide of what I observed. I think that the warnings from history are important because it can happen here, to quote another book, and for us to understand that threat. You can draw contrast, the nature of the rise of hate and the attacks in Germany were in some ways different, and some of the leaders were different. So you can draw parallels and contrasts, but the core point that anti-democratic movements still work off popular support is key. So they don't have 51%. If they did, if they regularly had 51%, they might just try to win a bunch of elections and go from there. They sometimes can win some elections, right? We've seen autocrats who began with what we would call a legitimate electoral victory. But in the essence, in the main, we are discussing the great challenge at the geopolitical level of the 20th century and the 21st century. And that is whether democracy can hold in these environments, or we revert back to autocracy and dictatorships. And I think that is the parallel that's important. As for fatigue, you know, I could paint it both ways. People have to be vigilant and not underestimate it. On the other hand, this shit's not popular. And everyone saw the Republicans on paper should have done better in the midterms by basically every, you know, we have AI now, we have ways to run it. You run that simulation without the authoritarianism, just take that out. Carrie Lake not saying, oh, I'll win either way, or I don't care what the, you know, take Trump out of it. Any other time, incumbent president in an off year with the problems we're facing, economics, inflation, and his relatively low approval ratings, would have done much worse, Biden and the Democratic Party. I think that was very clearly an onslaught against the authoritarianism, as well as Roe v. Wade, which relates to the idea of whether a minority is trying to legislate for a majority. So in some ways you can see a little bit of a linkage, but that was just the midterms. 2020, everyone saw what Donald Trump did before. That was before Jan 6 and rejected him. And then the softer mechanisms, Lord knows the bestseller list is not an indicator of who's going to be in charge. I wouldn't say that's political science, but 3 of the top 10 slots on the week this came out were of this book. The hearings were watched by tens of millions. Some of the hearings were carried on even Fox News during the day, not at night. There is a tremendous public interest in the facts of this. I would say this committee, and I don't work for the committee, I'm an independent journalist, so I'll tell you what I think. I thought some of their hearings, for example, the one on Vice President Pence's role, came up short and he sometimes even muddied the issue. But in the main, this has been one of the most effective congressional committees in the last several decades. The New York Times said it was the most effective congressional probe since the Watergate era. Yes. And that's partly because they did a decent job, and it's partly for the other reason I mentioned. People care about this. People are outraged. Moderates are outraged. Independents are outraged. Some Republicans are concerned. Many have been too supportive of minimizing it, and some supporting it. But you can find elected Republicans and regular Republicans, I would say, you know, 1 out of 5, 1 out of 6, who also say, well, we don't want to go this way. Well, add that all together, Barbara, that's not 51%. You're getting up to 60, 65% against. So yes. They're very concerning to see a third of the country and the bulk of the Republican Party support autocracy. But if you're keeping score, they're nowhere near the majority. So the majority just has to stay engaged.
Right. Ari, we're running close to the time that you've got available for us. Are there any things that you'd like to say about this topic that I neglected to bring out? This is your chance.
That's nice. I mean, look, I love doing this kind of stuff. You know, virtual is a way to kind of put this up for everyone wherever you may be. I'm doing an event in Washington, D.C. at Politics and Prose for this book with John Flannery. So if somebody happens to be watching it in that area, we can go meet in person. As mentioned, people can get our version of the book. You can go to melberbook.com or the links you guys have on it. I'll tell people who are watching, I also have a newsletter where I send out writings a couple times a month. You can go to arimelber.com to sign up for that. There's a free version. You can just pick the free version. That's what most people do. And I'll send you not too much email. I send a couple emails a month. In my view, you don't need it all every other day. And the top line big point is this can be a scary time, but it's also an important time, and it's an exciting time. And we quoted Gil Scott-Heron. I think we quoted Upton Sinclair. I'll quote some Jared Kushner in the spirit of listening to everyone. Kushner said very early on, what Trump understands and so many politicians don't is that conflict elevates message. Conflict elevates message. That's just a theory of persuasion. It could be used for getting the facts out there. It could be used for an ideology. It could be used for the right or the left. I think that is true, and especially true in our current media and digital age. And so that doesn't mean you have to create fake conflict or always seek it. But if conflict comes to you, it is a chance to elevate message, because if you just say, you know, it'd be nice is if we treated all librarians with respect. That's very nice. And I can caption that on a photo and people will say nice. But I can just tell you, as someone in this world, that's not going to move as far. God forbid, and again, we're not seeking this conflict, but if there is an actual conflict where someone was really terrible to a librarian and then the video goes viral and then everyone goes, that's wrong, they should be nice to our librarians, the conflict has elevated the message. And I can tell you that thing gets seen more than just the nice message. Where am I going with this? We didn't seek this conflict, and I think people would have rather it didn't happen, but it's here. The original insurrection and coup and the ongoing effort to lie about it, or the conflict over what it was. That is a chance to elevate the broader message that democracy matters, the rule of law matters, there must be accountability. And so that's my basic view of all this. I mean, I'll tell you this, I don't know how some of these really smart journalists do a nightly show and then they write full books, 500-page books. I've never been able to do that. I was offered a lot of things during Trump's presidency. Oh, Ari, could you do this? Could you do that? I didn't always do it. Oh, we want to write a book about something with Trump. I didn't do it. When this came up, it was like, this is so important. I want to at least write something along with the report, because this conflict is a time to weigh in, learn the facts, engage wherever you engage, whether that's locally or with friends or your community or activism or whatever. And the message is there really is this threat, but it really can be beaten down, and the democracy can come out stronger on the other side of it.
Well, we hope you do another book, I tell you. Talk to your agent. And I don't know if this was for hire or not, but I got to tell you, it's definitely worth reading. And I want to encourage everyone to read this particular edition, because I do own the other edition, not the New Yorker edition, because of course I live in Park Slope. I have to. I'm required to read the New Yorker. But anyway, this is it. And guys and gals, watch Ari or listen to Ari. You will not be. It's not a waste of time.
Thank you.
I mean it. I mean it. Thank you so much for taking time of your busy day. We really
thank you, guys.
Ari, thank you so much. This was such a wonderful conversation, such an intelligent exchange of ideas. Thank you both so much for taking the time to discuss this. We're just so powerful and so important. And this was just truly 30 minutes of sheer brilliance. And we thank you both so much for taking the time. And again, as Barbara said, we've got all the information in the chat room, including Ari's Twitter and Instagram and Facebook, but also, Barbara, just very quickly, if you want to mention Brian Lair's show.
Well, I'm a Brian. I was on the WNYC community board for years, and I adore Brian. And 10 a.m., it's Brian. And those of you who have not been introduced to Brian, he's an American treasure. And I thought that Ari's half-hour interview with Brian about, more specifically, when you talked about the impact of the new Congress, was very, very good interview.
Thank you.
And I learned a lot from it. And it reminded me that Schadenfreude may be fun, but we gotta be serious about this.
We need more than that. Well, Virginia,
Exactly.
Barbara, thank you. Thank you to
Thanks a
everyone.
lot.
Shout out to librarians. Appreciate you guys.
Thanks.
Thank you so
Bye-bye.
much, Ari. Take good care. Barbara, thank you. And The Beat with Ari Melber every night, 6 p.m. Eastern on MSNBC. It's brilliant. He is brilliant. Barbara, you are brilliant. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much for today. Lainey, Grace, anything before we sign off? Or Barbara?
Thank you, Jin.
You're welcome, Barbara. That was fabulous. Just fabulous.
Yeah. I don't even have anything that I think would add anything. It was just fantastic.
Well, you do are the person, I did, in honoring you, Lainey, I did think of Gil Scott-Heron because I know you loved his Rick Ross. And of course, I had asked my son who Rick Ross was. He said, Mom, what's wrong with you? Old school, Mom.
Well, are we still live?
Yeah,
Probably.
We just want to say that, you know, how this came about was Barbara had said, are you gonna have Ari on Facebook Live? I said, boy, from your lips to God's ears, if we could get on his schedule, wouldn't that be great? And if we could, Barbara, you know, would you interview him because you're genius? And she went, yes. And so it happened. So sometimes just add water. Don't ask, you don't get. What'd you say? What?
Dreams do come true. But I would really want to encourage you, if you're trying to, I find that if I'm trying to, you know, navigate my way through all of this information, there are two sources I go to. One is National Public Radio, and the other one is MSNBC Melber, because he, as you just heard, is smart, coherent, clear, incisive, and he tries to be neutral. He's not a yeller. He's not a ranter.
Yeah.
It's anchored. It's anchored in the law. And for that reason, I really admire him.
Yeah, so do we. We are big fans of his, my wife and I, and who's sitting right here and watching him. He's just, he just says it like it is. And as he did today, these were wonderful questions, Barbara. And of course, his responses were just illuminating and beautiful, scary and comforting. As somebody said, the truth is comforting and scary at the same time. Many links are in the chat, links to the show, Ari's Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all of that, and the link to the Brian Laird report, that show that Barbara had mentioned earlier. So with that, I think we are going to say
Ari's newsletter that he
and
made.
Ari's newsletter. Thank you, Barbara. Thank you, Lainey. Anything else? No? Okay, and the link is in there about the book. So I think we've covered it, and we thank you all so much for watching. And with this, I say we bid you adieu until next time. Take good care. Thanks again. Bye.